My husband raised his glass to celebrate 25 years of marriage, then used the microphone to destroy me in front of everyone. But before I could run, a billionaire stepped onto the stage and revealed the secret my husband had buried for decades. My husband grabbed the microphone at our 25th anniversary party, and before the night was over, I would understand that a marriage can die in front of 200 people before the wife even realizes it has been dying for years. He smiled like a man giving a toast. The crystal chandeliers above us were shining. The ballroom looked perfect. White lilies stood in tall glass vases. Our children were there. His business partners were there. Friends, relatives, people who had spent years admiring the life we looked like we had built together. Then Easton laughed. "Let's be honest," he said into the microphone. "I made the money. She just changed diapers. She is lucky I kept her." For a second, no one moved. And I remember thinking, not clearly, not logically, but somewhere deep in my body, there it is. There is the truth he has been hiding under nice suits, expensive dinners, anniversary photos, and polite smiles. Welcome to When Family Breaks One. And if this kind of story makes you question what really happens behind perfect family pictures, stay with me until the end, because what happened after that microphone was taken from his hand changed everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and the price of staying silent. Before we go further, please subscribe to support the channel. It helps me keep telling stories like this. Stories about the moments when families break, secrets rise to the surface, and people finally discover who they were before someone taught them to disappear. I have replayed that scene in my mind more times than I want to admit. Not because the insult was clever. It was not. It was cruel in the simplest way. But that is exactly why it hurt. Because cruelty does not need beautiful language when it has been rehearsed for years inside a person's heart. Easton did not stumble over those words. He did not look shocked by himself. He did not seem embarrassed when the room went quiet. He stood there like a man who believed he had finally said something honest. And maybe he had. Maybe that was the most honest thing he had said in our entire marriage. For 25 years, Antwanette had stood beside him. She had raised his children, managed his home, protected his image, softened his moods, remembered birthdays, hosted dinners, smiled beside him in photographs, and made his life look effortless. But in his mind, all of that had become nothing. Invisible work often disappears first in the eyes of the person who benefits from it most. That is what made the moment so devastating. He was not only insulting his wife, he was reducing an entire life of sacrifice into one ugly sentence. She just changed diapers, as if raising children was nothing, as if holding a family together was nothing, as if the quiet years, the unpaid labor, the dreams set aside, the exhaustion swallowed, the loneliness hidden behind a polished smile, none of it counted because it never appeared on a company balance sheet. The laughter that followed was thin and uncomfortable. People shifted in their seats. Some looked down at their plates. Some looked at Antwanette with pity, which somehow felt even worse than laughter. Because pity can make humiliation feel public twice. I think what haunted me most was not Easton's arrogance, but Antwanette's stillness. She did not scream. She did not throw a glass. She did not storm the stage. She sat there with her hands trembling, wearing the blue silk dress she had chosen so carefully, trying to understand how the man she had given 25 years to could turn her into a joke in front of everyone they knew. And that is when the room changed. A voice came from the edge of the stage, calm, controlled, dangerous in its quietness. "Excuse me." Every head turned. A tall, silver-haired man stepped forward from the shadows of the ballroom. He moved like someone who did not need permission to enter a room, because somehow the room already belonged to him. Easton blinked. The guests whispered. Antwanette stopped breathing, because the man walking toward the microphone was not just the billionaire owner of the hotel. He was Landon Blackwood, and the look on his face told me he had not come to congratulate them. He had come to correct a lie that had been allowed to live for 25 years. And when Antwanette followed Landon out of that ballroom, away from the whispers and the frozen faces, she was not escaping a scene. She was stepping into a truth she had spent 25 years avoiding. The night air outside the hotel felt almost too quiet after the humiliation inside. I imagine that kind of silence would feel strange, even frightening, because when someone has lived inside another person's version of reality for long enough, peace can feel unfamiliar at first. Antwanette stood on that private terrace overlooking the city, still wearing the dress she had chosen for a celebration that had turned into a public wound. Landon did not immediately speak about love. He did not try to turn her pain into romance. That is one of the details I find most important. A weaker man would have made the moment about himself. He would have said, "I told you so." He would have pushed his feelings forward because her marriage had just cracked open in front of everyone. But Landon started somewhere else. He started with who she used to be. "You were studying industrial design," he reminded her. "At Northwestern." That sentence sounds simple, but to Antwanette, it must have felt like someone opening a locked room in her own memory. Because nobody had spoken about her talent in years. Not seriously. Not with respect. Not as if it still mattered. In Easton's world, her past had become a decorative detail. Something cute. Something youthful. Something she had done before real life began. But Landon remembered it as real life. He remembered the lamp she designed with the curved glass base. He remembered how it caught light from different angles. He remembered her professor calling it one of the most innovative pieces he had seen in years. And I think that is where the emotional wound deepens. It is painful to be insulted. But it is almost more painful to be reminded that the person being insulted was never the whole truth of you. Antwanette had not always been uncertain. She had not always been the woman sitting quietly at charity dinners, smiling while men discussed the business world around her. She had once been alive with ideas. She had once stayed awake late into the night because her mind would not stop solving problems. She had once believed her creativity could build something that mattered. Then life asked her to choose. Or maybe it did not ask. Maybe it pressured her gently until the choice looked obvious. Easton offered stability, a clear future, a respectable life. Landon offered passion, uncertainty, and a dream that required courage. At 21, safety can look like wisdom, especially when the world has taught you that a woman should be practical, careful, grateful when a powerful man chooses her. So she chose Easton, and that choice became a life, a house, children, parties, a name beside his. But somewhere along the way, the price became larger than she understood. She did not just give up a career. She gave up the habit of believing in herself. That is what I want the listener to sit with, because many people think losing a dream means simply not doing the thing you wanted to do. But the deeper loss is what happens after. You stop introducing yourself as someone who creates. You stop defending your ideas. You stop noticing when your mind lights up. You begin to accept the smaller role because everyone around you seems more comfortable when you stay inside it. Landon saw that. And when he looked at Antwanette, he was not looking at Easton's wife. He was looking at the woman who had once felt like she was flying when a design finally worked. That is why his presence mattered. Not because he was rich, not because he owned the hotel, not because he could embarrass Easton in return. His real power was that he carried a memory of Antwanette that Easton had spent years trying to erase. He remembered her before the shrinking, before the apologies, before the careful silence, before she learned to call her own brilliance a phase. On that terrace, Antwanette was not ready to make decisions. Of course she was not. Her world had just split open in one evening, but something had already begun moving inside her. A question, small at first, terrifying. If Landon still remembered that woman, could she remember her too? And maybe that is the true beginning of her transformation. Not walking away from Easton, not taking Landon's hand, but standing in the dark, wrapped in a borrowed jacket, and realizing that the woman she thought was gone might only have been waiting for someone to say her name again. And once Antwanette began to remember who she had been, the next truth Landon revealed was not just painful. It was the kind of truth that rearranges an entire life. He told her Easton had not built Crawford Designs from nothing. He had built it from her. I keep coming back to that idea because betrayal is already cruel when it involves the heart. But this was something deeper than romantic betrayal. Easton had taken the most intimate part of Antwanette's identity, her imagination, and turned it into his empire while teaching her to believe she had no value outside his shadow. That is not only theft of ideas, that is theft of self. Landon explained it carefully, almost gently, as if he knew each sentence would land like a bruise. The modular furniture line that launched Easton's company. The convertible table that could shift into storage and dining space. The expandable shelving systems. the eco-friendly concepts that later made Crawford Designs look visionary in the industry. All of them traced back to sketches Antwanette had made years earlier. At first, I imagined she resisted the thought. Most people would. When a lie has held your life together for 25 years, the truth feels less like freedom at first and more like an earthquake. It threatens the house, the marriage, the family story, even the version of yourself you built just to survive. But then the memories started coming back. Easton asking about her design projects when they were young. Easton studying her sketches on the kitchen counter. Easton pretending to be fascinated by her ideas, asking detailed questions about materials, function, proportions, manufacturing. She had thought he was trying to understand her world. He had been memorizing it. That is the part that makes my stomach turn, because Antwanette did not simply hand him a product. She handed him trust. She showed him the private place where her mind came alive. She let him see the future she wanted to build, and he took that future, put his name on it, and then slowly convinced her she had never been capable of building anything at all. Gaslighting is not always loud. Sometimes it sounds like a husband smiling across the table and saying, "You don't really understand the business side." Sometimes it is a small laugh when you offer an idea. Sometimes it is praise turned into ownership. "That's interesting," he says, and months later the world applauds him for it. Over time, Antwanette stopped questioning it. That is what constant dismissal does. It trains a person to abandon their own evidence. She knew those ideas felt familiar. She knew something in her recognized them. But Easton had built such a strong story around his genius and her dependence that she no longer trusted her own memory. Then Landon opened the portfolio. The old sketches were still there. The lines. The concepts. The early versions of products that had made Easton rich. Page after page of proof that Antwanette had not imagined her brilliance. Proof that the young woman with ideas had been real. Proof that what had been stolen from her was not only professional credit, but the confidence to say, "This came from me." I think that moment is one of the most powerful in the entire story, because evidence can do something encouragement cannot always do. Encouragement says, "You can." Evidence says, "You already did," and Antwanette needed both. She needed someone to believe in her, yes, but she also needed to see with her own eyes that the woman Easton dismissed had once created work strong enough to build an empire. That realization did not make her instantly brave. Real awakening is rarely that simple. It probably made her furious, ashamed, confused, and grief-stricken all at once. She had to mourn not only the stolen designs, but the 25 years she spent clapping for the man who had stolen them. Then Landon offered her something Easton never had. Not rescue, not pity, ownership. A real partnership, creative control. A place where her name would be attached to her work, legally and publicly. A chance to design again, not as a hobby hidden between family duties, but as the center of her life. And that offer forced the question Antwanette could no longer avoid. Was she going to protect the comfortable lie because it had already cost her so much? Or was she finally going to reclaim the truth, even if reclaiming it meant watching everything familiar fall apart? That is the terrifying thing about getting your identity back. You cannot unsee what was stolen. And once Antwanette saw it, staying small was no longer peace. It was surrender. And when staying small was no longer peace, Easton did what controlling people often do when their power begins to slip. He called it concern. That is the part of this story I find the most chilling, because control rarely introduces itself honestly. It does not say, "I am afraid you are becoming strong." It does not say, "I need you quiet so my version of the story survives." It puts on a gentle voice. It uses family language. It borrows the face of protection. By the time Antwanette returned home, Easton was not alone. Richard was there, his brother, his lawyer, the kind of man who could make a threat sound like advice. Papers were spread across the coffee table. Their faces carried that careful expression people use when they have already decided what is wrong with you before you walk into the room. Easton called her sweetheart. That word felt different now, not tender, strategic. He said they had been worried. He said the incident at the party had gotten out of hand. He said Landon Blackwood was unstable, manipulative, dangerous. Notice how quickly the story changed. Easton had humiliated his wife in public, but somehow the crisis became the man who defended her. Somehow Antwanette's pain became confusion. Her dignity became a symptom. That is how manipulation survives. It moves the spotlight. It does not answer for the wound it caused. It questions the victim's reaction to the wound. Richard spoke gently about stress, emotional episodes, treatment centers, professional help. And I want to be very clear here. Real mental health support is important and should never be treated as shameful. But what Easton and Richard were doing was not care. It was using the language of care to make Antwanette doubt her own right to choose. They wanted her away from Landon, away from the portfolio, away from the evidence, away from any room where someone might say, "You are not imagining this." They wanted her placed somewhere quiet until she returned to the version of herself they could manage. And Antwanette understood. Maybe not perfectly, but enough. She understood that if she argued too hard, they would call it instability. If she cried, they would call it proof. If she raised her voice, they would use it against her. So she did something stronger than arguing. She stayed calm. She asked questions. She listened. Then she went upstairs and packed only what she needed. I love that choice because it was not dramatic in the way movies often teach us courage should be. There was no grand speech in the hallway, no shattered glass, no final accusation shouted from the staircase. Just a woman moving through a bedroom that had never truly felt like hers, choosing a few belongings, finding an old student id, and realizing the girl in that picture still belonged to her. Before leaving, she wrote to her children, not to defend every detail, not to turn them against their father, but to tell them the one truth she needed them to hear. She was not abandoning them. She was choosing herself before there was nothing left of her to choose. That distinction matters. People who benefit from your self-erasure will often call your healing selfish. They will say you are breaking the family when you are really breaking the pattern that kept you invisible. Antwanette walked out of that house with a suitcase, and Easton let her go because he still believed she was obedient. That was his mistake. He had mistaken her silence for surrender for so long that he could not recognize strategy when it was standing right in front of him. When she returned to Landon, she did not collapse into his arms. She did not ask him to save her. She handed him a letter and accepted the partnership. That was the turning point. Not because Landon had won, because Antwanette had chosen. But Easton's control did not end at the front door. Soon came the legal attacks, the claims that her new work belonged to him, the accusations that she was unstable, the attempt to freeze her future before it could take shape. And that is when Sarah began to see what her mother had lived under for years. Not all at once. Truth rarely enters a family gently. But when Sarah watched her father behave less like a wounded husband and more like a man trying to reclaim lost property, something shifted inside her. For the first time, Antwanette was not the quiet mother in the background. She was a woman standing at the edge of a fight she never wanted, holding proof, pain, and a future no one had given her permission to build. And this time, she did not ask anyone whether she was allowed to fight for it. And when Antwanette finally stopped asking whether she was allowed to fight, the battle became less about proving Easton wrong and more about proving herself real. That is what I think many people misunderstand about stories like this. They expect the final victory to be loud. They want the courtroom confession, the ruined villain, the perfect applause at the end. But the deepest victory happened before any judge made a decision. It happened when Antwanette walked into that courtroom carrying her own name with dignity. She was not there as Easton's embarrassed wife. She was not there as the woman who had been kept. She was there as a creator, a mother, a professional, and a human being who had finally decided that silence was no longer noble if it required self-betrayal. Sarah saw it too, and that mattered. Because when a daughter watches her mother stand up after years of shrinking, something changes in the bloodline. The lesson becomes different. Love no longer means disappearing. Family no longer means obeying the person with the loudest voice. Peace no longer means pretending the wound is not there. Antwanette did not win because another man loved her. She won because she remembered how to love herself without asking permission. And maybe that is why this story stays with me. It forces me to ask a question I do not think any of us can avoid forever. How many years can a person live inside a role before they forget there is still a soul underneath it? A wife, a husband, a parent, a provider, a caretaker, a good son, a good daughter. Roles can be beautiful, but they become dangerous when they demand that we bury the person wearing them. So if this story found you at the right time, maybe it is not just entertainment. Maybe it is a mirror. Maybe there is a part of you that still remembers who you were before someone made you feel small. And if you have ever felt unseen, underestimated, or quietly erased, write your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Subscribe to When Family Breaks One for more stories about truth, family, betrayal, courage, and the moment someone finally chooses themselves. When I look back at Antwanette's story, what stays with me is not only the public humiliation, the stolen designs, or even the courtroom fight. What stays with me is how quietly a person can disappear inside a life that everyone else calls successful. From the outside, she had everything people are taught to admire. A long marriage, grown children, money, a beautiful home, social respect, and a husband whose name carried power. But behind that polished image was a woman who had slowly been taught to doubt her own voice, minimize her own gifts, and accept a smaller version of herself because it made everyone else more comfortable. And that is the lesson I think this story leaves behind. Sometimes the greatest danger is not one loud betrayal. It is the slow habit of accepting less than your worth until less begins to feel normal. Antwanette did not lose herself in one night. She lost herself through years of silence, sacrifice, fear, and the belief that keeping peace meant swallowing the truth. But the moment she saw the truth clearly, she had a choice. Stay loyal to the life that erased her, or become loyal to the person she still had a chance to become. The lesson for us is not that we should destroy our families, run from responsibility, or treat every conflict as betrayal. The deeper lesson is this: love should never require self-erasure. A healthy relationship should make room for your growth, your voice, your talent, and your dignity. If someone only values you when you are quiet, useful, obedient, or dependent, then what they love may not be you. It may be the control they have over you. In real life, we can apply this gently but honestly. Start by asking yourself, where have I been shrinking? What dream did I stop talking about because someone made me feel foolish for wanting it? What part of me have I hidden to keep peace? Then take one small step. Write the idea down. Reopen the skill. Set a boundary. Ask for respect. Speak to someone trustworthy. Learn again. Create again. Remember again. You do not have to rebuild your entire life overnight, but you do have to stop calling disappearance devotion. So I want to ask you one simple question. Have you ever felt unseen by someone you gave your best to? Please share your thoughts in the comments so everyone can learn from each other's experiences. And if this story touched something in you, subscribe to When Family Breaks One to support the channel and help me keep creating more meaningful stories like this.